general, when I would read books, it felt kind of like a burden, or someone was telling me I had to do it, but there wasn't necessarily a lot of joy there. But as I skimmed through the pages of this very small book, uh, something in me began to awaken, and it may sound strange, but every word resonated as truth, and it was so simple and yet so pure. And that book was the Tao Te Ching.
Welcome back to the Consciousness of the Way. I'm very excited to have this conversation with another creator and an ambassador to ancient practices where people cultivate a higher sense of self through these basically intuitive plant medicines. He's also a podcaster. I want to welcome to the podcast, Jason. How are you, my friend?
Very good. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yes, yes. Your history is so rich in this ancient practices and in holding that torch and sharing it with the world. How people can access a higher state of awareness through these very, very rich plant medicines. And I'm very curious to explore this conversation with you today. How about we start with a little origin story? I apologize. Sorry about that. How about we start with a little origin story where you basically became this ambassador or this wisdom teacher of this ancient art form?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you again for inviting me on and for this opportunity. Um, Obviously, always these are big questions, and they can take form in many different directions. But we were chatting a bit before we started, and you brought up this idea of truth, and I think that was probably a very strong calling for me, was searching for truth. And that really led me from a young age. I mean, I had quite an interesting childhood in that I traveled a lot with my father. He was very interested in kind of very remote indigenous communities and peoples around the world, and so I grew up having a lot of contact with them. And um, I think from an early age, I saw that people were people. Like wherever you went, people shit and they ate and they made jokes, and I think that had a probably a very profound impact on me. At the same time, I think I realized that there was a lot of very deep wisdom in a lot of these very traditional cultures, and I think that really led me on a journey of, maybe for lack of a better word, a spirituality, a spiritual journey. And I ended up becoming very interested in all sorts of different esoteric practices. I ended up moving to New York City, which may seem strange, but for me, it was very much this kind of gateway to be able to learn. And any practice in the world had some expression in this huge city. And so, even probably like your name, I started practicing a lot of things like qigong and tai chi and yoga, and a lot of martial arts, and just devouring spiritual texts wherever I could get to them. These very classic texts, and then eventually I ended up taking a very long journey around the world, predominantly through Asia, and beginning to practice some of these techniques. And then upon returning back to the U.S. where I was from. I started to have this calling specifically from one plant, and I was very interested in plants because even in a lot of these kind of esoteric systems that I was studying, like traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurveda or European herbalism, there was always a very strong emphasis on plants, and plants as food, plants as medicine, and I became very, very interested in that. Um, but even in those traditions, like, I found at their essence, they were speaking in very spiritual terms, and yet, at least the way I was finding them was very of this world. I mean, even speaking of medicine, I found a lot of the ways they were being practiced was still in a very kind of allopathic system of treating a symptom with a plant and trying to nullify the effects of it. But when I would go deep into kind of the origins of these traditions, they really seemed to be speaking in these terms of spirit, and that there was a deeper essence, to the root of these diseases, rather than just something very biological or chemical. Some people may call that a more kind of shamanic way of looking at things. And, even in the martial arts, which I always found very fascinating, I mean, I was also very interested in that kind of more spiritual aspect of it. Um, and so this calling of this one particular plant, which was quite interesting, because it was, I don't know, maybe 15 years or so ago, maybe even more. I start to lose track of time, but it was a plant called ayahuasca, which I think many people are familiar with now. But at the time, there was very little information out there. The only reason I think heard of it was I had a good friend who was part of a kind of a Brazilian synergistic church called Santo Daime, and but I never really felt called to work with it via that format. I think because at the time it had a very religious structure or form to it. It's very much based in Christianity, also very much African spiritism as well. But I think for whatever reason that form didn't call me. But I felt called to this plant, and it was very difficult to kind of describe at the time, to be called by a plant. But at a certain point, my rational mind couldn't keep kind of making excuses or trying to somehow put it into something that I could understand. And I found myself in the Peruvian Amazon, working with that plant, and it was a very profound experience, and it really brought light to a lot of the questions that I was looking for. This very deep calling that there was something beyond the world of form, and this plant brew and the tradition that I found was very much a gateway to that. And so I ended up going back there a few months later with this idea to just spend 1 year there and learn as much as I could and try and understand the worldview, the cosmovision, the techniques, the methodologies of these people. And I ended up spending probably more than a decade there, and then eventually also going up to the Andes in Peru, and also learning there. And it's just been a very organic process. And during that time, I ended up working very deeply, not only with ayahuasca, but really with the pharmacopoeia of plants in the Amazon, and eventually being initiated in a certain tradition, and then eventually actually taking that, the word I often use is technology, it's a technology that was gifted to me, that I learned, that was open to me, and then really trying to bridge that with more of the kind of quote unquote Western world. So working more with Western plants, with European American plants, because as I did this work more and more, the people who I was working with were people like me, people who came from those places. And so while there was a very beautiful connection of working specifically with Amazonian plants and trees, um, there's also something that's very removed from most people's realities of doing that. And so being able to kind of bridge that technology, that wisdom, those traditions, but working very specifically with plants, with cosmovisions, with methodology, with language, with cultures of where people were coming from. And so that's really been my work. And then also, as we were also talking before we started, starting this podcast to really to help to give voice to people who I respect, or I think also as the podcast grows, kind of expanding even beyond plants as a physical modality, but just the world of spirit, the world of spirituality. And even in these traditions, the plants, that's kind of the maybe one of the differences of what I was saying, was this more kind of allopathic way of looking at the plant, because it's not seen that the plant only heals the physical body. It's seen that it's also working on the mental body, the emotional body, and even on a deeper level, the spiritual body. So it's seen that each of these plants is really a gateway to spirit. And so at the essence, I think it's something that really separates a lot of these very old traditions from some of the more maybe modern ways that we look at the world. So I know that was maybe a bit of a long answer, but
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. You know, personally, I've been on this conscious journey for about 36 years as a, or, pretty much an ordained priest teaching ancient ritual. And so we have these methods of alchemy that actualize and activate these sort of experiences that are more what we call permanent. So we take immortality, crystallize it into what we call the material. And so by crystallizing immortality, making it a realized fact as this permanence where you are eternal, immortal forever, the physical body starts to take on and embody this frequency that makes it possible for longevity. And in turn, if you harness it through history of Taoist canons, you can hold that frequency, that resonance forever. Now, that's yet to be proven, but yeah, we're experiencing some of these things quite often. So when I see people taking on incredibly powerful plant medicine, they seem to get a glimpse of what their potential is, but they're not potentially able to hold that resonance to make it an actualized state of awareness that they can maintain throughout their whole experience. How would you, because you've been experiencing this for so long biologically in this space and being aware of the power of these activators, how do you maintain a resonance that has been activated or actualized through this union, this ancient ritual, this union? You're bringing in something that will evoke the true essence of who you are, and that permanence will be revealed. How does the initiate hold on to that resonance and make it a permanency?
It's a great question, and I think a great reflection. Interestingly, you asked about my journey, and probably my journey actually began. It was my mother's birthday, and I think I was 15, and at that time in the States, you could drive a car at 15, and I ended up going to the local bookshop, and obviously at 15. One doesn't have much money, and so I found myself gravitating towards the discount book table. And I ended up getting her a book on home decoration or design or something. But I was very drawn to this very diminutive book that was sitting there. And I opened it and I started reading through it. And it's very difficult to even describe because I had a very visceral reaction to it. And I was always very good at school. I mean, in the U.S. I got A's, and I guess I enjoyed school to some degree, but it was never that of a passionate thing for me. I felt like most of it was somewhat of a burden. It was somewhat of a chore of just going through motions of having to do something. I found much more, I think, joy and peace in nature. And so I just say that because in general, when I would read books, it felt kind of like a burden, or someone was telling me I had to do it, but there wasn't necessarily a lot of joy there. But as I skimmed through the pages of this very small book, uh, something in me began to awaken, and it may sound strange, but every word resonated as truth, and it was so simple and yet so pure. And that book was the Tao Te Ching. And so, it's very interesting because I think what you say is very correct on many levels. There is a unionizing when someone ingests a plant, when someone ingests water, when someone ingests food, when someone ingests sound, when someone ingests energetic resonance, when someone ingests love, and it's seen that each of these plants has a spirit, much like you have a spirit, I have a spirit, that everything that's manifest in this world is of that universal energy of that God essence. And so it contains God within it. And yet everything is unique. And it's not like a new agey concept. I mean, even science says like you can never replicate exactly two things. You look at raindrops and they all look the same, and yet every two of those raindrops is unique. Every two uh, falling snowflakes is absolutely unique. And so, in that way, um, all of these plants are unique. They have a unique spirit to them. And so, as you begin to ingest that, it's seen that they're a type of a teacher. They often in South America, the now one of the kind of the lingua franca is actually Spanish, um, and so they use this word. They use the word maestro, which means teacher, and that's how they refer to a lot of these plants. And in general, it tends to be a lot of trees, because trees are also seen archetypally as the bridge of the three worlds. They're rooting into the earth or into the underworld. They have a strong trunk, which represents the strength of this world, of this lived world, and they're branching towards the heavens. So they have a connection to spirit and to heaven. Also correlates to the three aspects of time, past, present, future, to the three aspects of our body, our body, our mind, and our spirit. The three worlds. So, as you said, when one ingests one of these plants, one is going into a union experience. There's a merging of who I am with something that's being taken in, something that's new. That's why in many religions around the world, there's this idea of a sacrament. I'm taking on a sacrament, whether it's in Christianity, the Eucharist, the literal blood and flesh of Christ, or whether it's in a Vedic tradition or a Taoist tradition. There's often this idea of taking in a sacrament. And as you said, something that creates alchemy in the body, something that changes us on a fundamental level. Um, Even if you look at a lot of these plants on a more physical level, I mean, there's more work on that, on things like ayahuasca or tobacco. Um, there's more of a, I think, an emerging science, for example, of like neurology, and you often see these studies that come out of things like neurogenesis, neuroplasticity, that literally it's beginning to rewire our minds so that we actually see the world differently. We're not seeing it through the same patterns, through the same conditioning, through the same neural pathways, but something is either being generated, meaning it's being created, a new pathway is opening, or these old pathways have a certain plasticity. They're not so rigid, they're not so hard, they're not so entrenched, and something is being created. um and so, as you said, it's very interesting, because in a lot of these traditions they would say that all of these plants are not only unique, but they have a unique story, they have a unique sound, they have a unique vibration. Often that's represented artistically. It could be represented by some drawing that's very unique to that plant, the energetics of it, through a song, through a vibration of sound, through the breath. All of these things are seen as ways that we can harness that energy of the plant. And as you said, ultimately, if one is working with any of these plants, and one has an enlightening experience, a revelational experience, but one remains unchanged, then it's just that. It's a fleeting experience. And while there may be some benefit to that, it's not necessarily lasting. And that's ideally not the way to work with these plants. That's why there is so much tradition and respect and reverence, and often very initiatory experiences, because often to form a connection or an allyship to these plants was seen that of something that actually created or took a lot of sacrifice, a lot of fasting, isolation, meditation, deprivation, and often bringing us traditionally to a point of death, to where our physical body was weakened, to where our mind was pushed to a limit, to where these barriers had to begin to break down. And if we fought them, which most people do, in that struggle, it's like we're just going up against a wall. But as something is released, as something is let go, that knowledge, that wisdom is able to be perceived by us. And so I think to answer your question, all of those things you were saying are very true. All of those alchemical ideas, all of those ideas of taking the spirit, of ingesting it, of allowing it to alchemize our body, to change us. This is the highest reverence that we can give one of these plants, one of these trees, is to embody it. If it's not embodied, it didn't do its job, or probably better, we didn't do our job. That's the highest respect we can give to a plant, is to embody its wisdom, to live its wisdom, to live its wisdom in our words and our thoughts and our actions. Because that's also this idea that's different between the physical plant and the spirit of the plant. You know, the physical plant is also limited. It's limited to its location. It can only affect so much. And that's one of the magical things about a human being, is if we truly embody that energy, that teaching, that wisdom of the plant, we have the ability to manifest that into the world. We have the ability to bring that into the world and to actually create real change. Um, and so then also, yeah. Sorry. So that's also, you know, as you said, it's, how does one do that to where it's not a fleeting experience? That's part of the art, and that's part of the tradition. And you know, much like I'm sure you're familiar with, I mean, someone can pick up a book on qigong or nikong, or you know, the Tao Te Ching, anything. I mean, you can learn a lot of practices, but you know, very often in these traditions, there was a deep knowledge, a deep wisdom of a real dedication to a certain path, so that one could really embody those teachings. And you know, as these plants or things go more out into the public, that's always one of the dangers, that we forget the traditions, we forget the stories, we forget the rites, we forget the rituals, we forget the technologies that were there to really allow us to go deeply into this work. And it's not that that it's, you know, inherently 100% a bad thing. I mean, even, for example, sometimes synthesizing the alkaloids of these plants, which is something that's happening now, and working with it in a clinical setting, even there can be amazing results. I mean, you look at some of the studies. For example, there's a big hospital university in the US called Johns Hopkins, and they became quite well known for their work with psilocybin, which is one of the active alkaloids in a mushroom that you can find in nature. And even just working with psilocybin on people who were terminally ill on their deathbed, I'm probably going to butcher the statistics, but something like 80% of them described it as one of the top three most profound experience of their life. And I believe even the majority of them said it was the most profound experience. And it gave them a certain peace. It gave them a certain reflection as they were dealing with this terminal illness, to die more peacefully, which, you know, is also at the root of a lot of these practices. So, you know, that's also part of the evolution of life, of humans, of even these plants and traditions, is that they will continue to evolve. But as you said, one of the dangers is these things can be worked with, and it can potentially not have a lasting effect because we don't embody the wisdom, and that's a super important part of any of these traditions.
Yes, it's so profound, your insight and your understanding, because you know, we refer to the alchemical path as the Taoist rites of passage, and we speak on it as immortality crystallized within the material. And once recognized, alterations to this material are available upon the initiate to create, which is their natural default, a wholeness, and return everything to wholeness by mastering the energy potential, the symbiosis within this state. And then furthermore, crafting and remembering that resonance and holding that resonance so that others can remember who they are. And that's part of that mastery and that alchemical process. And, functionally, metaphysics of Tao is quite simple. The animation of the mother, the primordial mother, is the animation to consciousness. Consciousness is the animation to the Shen, which we refer to as the spirit. The spirit is the animation to energy. Energy is the animation to the body. So everything that is a oscillating, reverberating pulse or expression is a wave that is impermanent, that is perishable, that decays, that folds back into itself, which is energy potential. It is not the permanence of you, the eternal immortal, which is magnetic. It is forever. And when you understand how to activate that, magical things take place. Yeah. Yeah.
Even my main teacher, he would often say these initiatory experiences. It's the journey of 1,000 deaths, and ultimately that is at the root, I would say, of most of these shamanic practices is immortality. That's the idea of spirit. That's what spirit is. It's that which is not bound to this world of duality. It's that which is eternal. And even some of these things you were mentioning, I mean, that's where it's so fascinating, because I think all of these paths are pointing to the same truth, because truth is oneness, and there's many ways of getting there, but the keys are pointing to the same thing. And it's often spoken in this work that this work is a path of remembering. And it's one of the things that's really fascinating, because often when we ingest a plant, and I also had this idea that, okay, well, I don't need anything from the outside because I have everything within, and that's very true on a fundamental level. Um, at the same time, like, if I want to nail a nail into a piece of wood, I mean, I could do it with my hand, and there's certainly practices that will teach me to do that. Um, but we only have so much time to, and so often using a hammer is better than maybe spending 30 years developing the strength in my hand to be able to do that. But it's very interesting, because even this idea that I'm taking something from the outside is, there's a truth to that, but it's also very fascinating. So for example, if I ingest ayahuasca, or if I ingest tobacco, it's not inherently that I'm introducing something from the outside, and that's like something new that's coming into me. There's already, using the example of tobacco, there's already, and this is a very limited way of looking at it, because the plant is whole, as you said, that was one of the words you used. So we're already tending to reduce it to kind of parts. But often, for example, tobacco, people know it as nicotine, but nicotine, it has been studied, but it's not that like the nicotine is coming in and doing something new. It's that there's already inside of us a nicotinic receptor. And so it's simply going into something that's already inside of us and turning a key and opening. It's one of the things with ayahuasca. Again, it gets boiled down to something very simple, to dimethyltryptamine, DMT. It's far more complex than that. But it's a similar thing. Like, it's going in, and there's already a receptor within us that's being opened. And also, all of these things, something like DMT, we also produce naturally. So uh, you don't need to take it from ayahuasca. You can go into a cave that's black for 30 days, and you will produce a lot of DMT. You produce DMT when you go to sleep at night. It's surmised that you produce very large doses of DMT the moment you come into this world. You in I guess, Spanish or Latin, respirar, to breathe, to be filled with spirit, to be filled with your first breath. And when you expire, when you let out your last breath, there's also a huge surge of DMT. So I say that because you use this idea of remembering, and so it's often seen that these traditions are helping us to remember. And it's this idea that we already have everything inside of us, and it's trying to unlock that inherent wisdom that's already innate to who we are, that's already innate inside of us. And also that idea of wholeness, and that idea of creation. I think it's very beautiful. And I'm often reminded of one of the groups that I lived and studied with are called the Shipibo Kanibo people. And um, they have this word for good. And it's very interesting. I find etymology very fascinating, like the roots of words, where they come from, what they mean on a deeper level, because that really shapes our cosmovision. It shapes our worldview. It shapes how we see the world, whether we see it as good or bad, or the creative force that we understand the world through. And so it's very interesting. And from what I understand, the word good, it's true, but it's more of a kind of, in our language, in English, what we would translate that word to. In their language, it's hakun. But in a deeper level, it means truth. So that which is true is that which is good, which is, very fascinating. Imagine if instead of saying good, you said that is true. And then on an even deeper level, what do they mean by truth? Uh, it has to do with this idea that it's a life-giving energy. And so that which is not good is not true. That which is hakun mu, the negation of hakun, is that which is separating, that which is dividing. And so the essence of truth is life-giving, that life-giving energy, that unifying energy. And that's what is true, and that's what is good. And so it reminded me of that when you were kind of reflecting on that idea of wholeness, that idea of creation. It's life-giving, it's unifying, it's truth, and therefore it's good.
Beautifully said, my friend. And I mean, that's really the absolute truth for any seeker to a knower on that path of a Taoist rites. You find that you become sort of a developed mastery from initiate to mastered state of now comes through that alchemical process. And when you can recognize and realize that and embody that, you are able to, as I put it, create alterations in this material for the betterment of the higher state of consciousness, always returning everything to whole. So playing with that, tango, that dance between yin and yang, how it, yin is the absorption of all colors and yang is the emission of all colors. And your mission, if you choose to accept it, Ethan Hunt, if you've ever watched Mission Impossible, another story, I'm a little bit of a fanboy, you will find that center point, that vesica, that center point that will be actualized, will be realized as unified. And that's when you get down with the get down. And then all of a sudden, magical, mystical, serendipitous, synchronistic things start to become the very normal default of your reality as you move through that. And your relationship becomes more and more intimate with that ancient knowing. And it comes through that. It's like you and I are communing in this conversation, but we're having a visceral experience. There's a visceral connection, and we are experiencing it through the body as a tuning fork. There's a community that's been created as we speak because we are attuning to each other. And from that, you get this expression, this oscillation, this charge through the body that recognizes that remembrance and that potency. And this is a constant. And I think a lot of people want to escape the body so quickly, yet it's your data point of reference for experience. And ultimately, many people do what they call the spiritual bypass and go straight to the Brahman, the cosmic consciousness, yet have never felt into this incredible gift that we call the body, the flesh that looks back at you in the mirror. This is also a grounding tool to embody the earth so you can maximize your journey, as we put it. You're an immortal having a human being experience. allow yourself to feel into that, to own that, to be actualized, be realized as this incredible gift, and turn what would be considered human condition to human beingness. And that's through the labyrinth of the finite mind that everyone tells you is so corrupted and bankrupt. Yet, once merged with the intuitive state, the unconscious, you have access to everything at once. You have access to all things as that state of realization. Your Sherlock to your Watson will be realized. Elementary, my dear Watson. And that labyrinth only becomes conditioned by the initiate's boundaries of how they've taken in what they perceive as their reality. And that's why I find it so refreshing to hear your wisdom teaching and share more and have people remember this embodiment that can take place when they ingest these sacred plants, because that is remembering who they are. And if cultivated in the right path of their own realization, they will embody it and they will remember, they will expand. Because within Taoism, we call everything the great bellows, which is the basically our lens of reality. Everything is contracting and expanding at the same time. You're all things and nothing at the same time. And this is the paradox that most people have a head screw over. It's like, Jifu, what does that even mean? And, you know, that charge you and I are getting right now is the aha moment. We drop the mic. We're both in the same state of resonance, and we are embodying this moment as a ritual, as an ancient union of this state. Shout out to my parapsychologist friends. They might refer to this as psychokinesis, or just a biofield merging with another one where you are me, I am you. We have never left each other. We are whole. And that's that beautiful part and that exciting journey. And you remember that you, Dorothy, you are no longer in Kansas. You are here now, whole, perfection, manifest, as we put it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because in a lot of these paths, I think a lot of people who come down to for example the Amazon, and they work with these traditional healers, plant medicine people. They often look at them through the eyes of maybe this more Eastern Indian guru kind of lens, and they're often very surprised, even with little things, like, for example, that they have big families, um, because they have this idea that they should be celibate or not of this world. And these people are very of this world. I mean, they're not floating around, and they're most of the time they're laughing and doing normal things, chopping wood, carrying water. And that's that idea of really embodying things, of living things, of taking that information and bringing it to this world. And as you said, in a lot of these traditions, people are often searching or longing for these very kind of out of body experiences, and there's something very beautiful to that, very very profound to that. And yet we all come back. And that was even a bit of my path. Like, even in when I mentioned, I ever since a young boy, I was very fascinated by martial arts, and I was fascinated by the martial arts that embodied what I would describe as more of this kind of spiritual essence, things like Aikido and Tai Chi and Ni Kung. Um, because all of that really resonated as true, these ideas of leverage and using someone's energy against them, and connecting to spirit, like honoring these traditions. And but then also at a certain point I realized, like I don't really know what it is to get punched in the face. Like I don't know what it is to have some guy like literally coming after me, trying to kill me. And so, even in martial arts, they often they categorize these more soft traditions versus the harder traditions, and the harder traditions being the ones where you strike and you are punched in the face and you are kicked in the leg. And I found that deeply beneficial. I mean, deeply beneficial. And often they don't have, maybe on the surface, this more kind of superficial spirituality, but it's very much there. But it's very much also these very deep, long initiations before you can even really begin to grasp what that more spiritual side is. For example, I did Muay Thai, or I do Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and all of those things are there. And in jujitsu, it's all about leverage. It's all about using someone's energy against them. It's all about transforming that. But at least what I found, and I think it's true for everyone, is you can never get to that by studying it, by just focusing on that. Like, you have to go through all of the base levels. You have to go through getting choked out, and you're someone trying to break your arms, and feeling the weight of someone who's really big on top of you. And it's a long process. I mean, it's years and years and years before finally that idea that you can use leverage begins to click, because then it's actually in your body. It's not something that's just in your mind. You practice something 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and then one time when the guy's coming at you, you roll him over, and it's effortless. And even then you're like, how did I do that? I can I even do that again? And probably not. Probably it's another 10,000 times before you even begin to really have some mastery over that. And so I think that's a very, very important part. And I think something that's often overlooked, and I think something very beautiful, for example, about like these Taoist paths, is they're not separating things. I mean, even these plant traditions in Taoist or ancient Chinese traditions, I mean, that's where traditional Chinese medicine comes from. It comes from the Taoist practitioners, because they didn't separate things. They didn't separate. Where did martial arts come from? It also came from the Taoist masters. They didn't separate martial arts, fighting, from philosophy, from medicine, from alchemy, from cosmology, from politics, to being a good father. All of these things were seen as part of the whole, and they all had to be studied. They all had to be uh, learned to, as you said, to be whole, to be a full human being who understands the workings of all of these things. And then, it's said very beautifully that it's a Japanese samurai. His name was Miyamoto Musashi, and he said very beautifully that when you begin to understand the way, you see it in all things. And he was allegedly the best samurai, and probably so, because he lived to tell his story. And if you lived, you were probably the best, because you fought to the death. So the guys who didn't recount anything, they didn't survive, and he did. And he's a poet in that way, and a very beautiful man. But I think that's very much part of that philosophy, is as you begin to understand the way through seeing it in all things, then you truly can really see it in all things, and embody that wisdom.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's like the very now moment is all you have. When you realize you're all things and nothing, that's when you enter what we call the primordial mother. So something as ancient as the breath, which is evidence of infinite potential that goes beyond time. That is when you enter the center point between the breath in and the breath out, between yin and yang, is activation, actualized substance of the primordial mother in this material state. And by pause, you detach from the body and you enter the internal, immortal, forever you. And that is part of the alchemical cultivational practice. It's so, so much foundational. And when people don't understand how the breath is the very ancient or change within this material state. They get caught up in, I must be out of my body. I'm seeing ghosts and spirits, and I'm a medium, and I'm got lucid dreams, and I'm being able to predict things. And these are all fantastic tastes of what we call a bite of the spiritual dragon. Yet they cannot be repeated. They're like an undulating flame that is elusive. You reach for it, then it's gone. And then the identity corrupts that union that the initiate is basically exposed to, because they're not able to truly take what we call the selfishness to the selflessness requires a sacrifice. That sacrifice is where you feel puckered up and you are relinquishing something that you believe you need to behold, where in actuality, it's something that you surrender to be whole, and you reclaim and liberate energy from that processes, which so many people fundamentally are, they're consumed with control, they're consumed with consumption. And that fringe benefit of that is the personality, which is an external, basically corrupter. People don't understand that the personality is an external state. The true self is not required. Your participation is not required to be self-realized. And then people go, what in Tao's name does that mean? And so I love this avatar. I love my personality. It's a gift from the Tao. And I love driving my side by side in the desert at 100 miles an hour, eating chocolate bonbons. And unfortunately, I still subscribe to Netflix. Yet that is not required when I am observing the observer and being in the present moment, witnessing what would seem to be an impossibility, a miracle, something that would be defined as supernatural, which in a Taoist path of alchemy is supernormal, manifestation, magic, healing. This is a union. And for that, it shifts someone's ability to realize who they are. And so the purpose of these types of events is to bear witness, to give someone else the opportunity to remember who they are through these processes. So something, as you referred to, being able to hammer a nail with your bare hands. This is a conditioning, like everything. With the reality of the great bellows, there's creation, completion, and then rebirth. These states of awareness are constantly given to you as a seeker for this greater knowledge and ancient wisdom. And the more and more you're able to experience that, you enter into the Wu Ji, which is the primordial mother. It's between the breath in and the breath out. And once you hold that resonance, all of a sudden you become literally what Bruce Lee coined back in the 70s, the flow, baby. The flow is evident. And we refer to that as Wu Wei, effortless action, effortless effort. And this is a conditioned cultivational practices where you stay and maintain your true self, and that you can access anything. You detach and attach as all things. And I really believe that these ancient practices and this embodiment and ritual that you teach people through these plant medicines give people that very pause and opportunity to remember. And as you said before, it's about truly embracing that very moment for it to be activated, actualized as their true nature. And that is where I think people pause. They get consumed by the event, they get consumed by the potency, but because they haven't conditioned themselves for the event, for the remembrance, it's impermanent, it's transitory, it's decayed and corrupted, and it basically consumes itself and falls back into a neutralized state, not actually opening the gateway and making it a permanence. And this is where, without the correct guidance, I believe that people fundamentally step into it, and they're not conditioning this vehicle to hold that resonance. Because ultimately death is just evidence of your inability through the flesh to hold the resonance of your potency. It's a container for energy. And once that container no longer can sustain the resonance, it gives you a heads up that it's time to move on to the next avatar. And so when people don't honor that and feel that tactile response of the flesh, which generally activates lower energy centers from ancient practices, whether it's a chakra, within Taoism, it's a dantian, you don't get to hold that and truly embody it and be the emanation of that in this current state. You feel fleeting. You stay between the head and the heart, which can be very, very distorted, because a lot of the clairvoyants or mediums or healers that come to me for remembrance, they have this insight, this incredible intuitive state, but because they're not able to hold it, it becomes an inverted a yin experience, which corrupts the body. So you start to see it through the flesh, whether it comes from excess body fat, imbalances within the hormones. You will start to see it raise to the top. And, through Chinese medicine, as you understand it, these are very much a fundamental way to absorb what is transitory, being everything within this material state. Thoughts, feelings, and emotions is where people get corrupted. They start to absorb it within the flesh, and they believe that that is their truth, which then starts to show itself through a transmuted effect of physical, decay. And you see it. You're like, mortality is very real. And the more and more you invest in it without remembering who you are, your short-lived experience is like basically a fuse that just burns out very quickly.
Yeah, it's these experiences that people have are so varied. I think one way of looking at a lot of these sacred plants is this energy of God, of union, this divinity. And so the experience is going to be as unique as the individual. And it's why kind of this idea of chasing the experience or someone else's experience will never happen, because it can't happen. And even chasing an experience that we want, like there's this kind of colloquial phrase that's often used that these plants don't give us what we want, they give us what we need. But the experiences can be so varied, and it's a product of who we are, of where we're coming from, of our life circumstances, our DNA, our epigenetics, our thought patterns, and the work that we've done in this life. Like all of that, you can extract from the experience. And so um, that's sometimes very difficult for people to hear, because even these things are often referred to as medicines, and that's again more of that allopathic way of looking at things, that I have a sickness and I want this plant or this substance to heal it. But who we are is far deeper than simply the physical manifestation. And so the journey that someone goes on is going to be very, very unique, seemingly from nothing happening to very much some of these things you described, to understanding that my thoughts and fears and the way I see the world creates this trap that I'm in, and that at my essence is this eternal space of now, this wu wei, this dance between this space between the inhale and the exhale, that everything is ultimately good and peace, and that is who I am. And yet also that energy, um, sometimes it is just a fleeting experience because we're not able to contain it. it's a very common thing when I was facilitating at this large center. People would often come with these ideas like I want enlightenment, and it's of course it's a noble goal, and hopefully a goal that we all have, whether in this life or another. But like, are you ready for that? Are you ready for what that entails, for the energy, for the experience that one has to pass through, to pass through that eye of the needle, to experience whatever we want to call it, the Tao, God, the universe, in all of its glory and all of its horror and all of its intricacy and all of its beauty and all of its darkness. It's a tremendous energy to hold. And so also, as you said, like, what are we doing? How are we preparing ourselves? It's very similar to martial arts. I mean, two people can come to martial arts and have a very different experience. I mean, one is maybe, for whatever reason, been sitting on their couch and eating potato chips and watching movies and dreaming about martial arts, and it's still good. They still come to it. And yet someone else has maybe been meditating and being very careful with their food and exercising and lifting weights and studying energetic practices and reading books like the Tao Te Ching, and then they come to martial arts, and it's a very different experience. And so it's these plants and these experiences are so varied, and so it's also difficult to speak about them in a universal way, because they're going to be so varied, so specific to each person, to where they're at, to what they're coming for. Some people are coming for something very specific, like they have a very bad relationship with their parent, and that's the thing that they really feel they need work with, and they may receive that. And that more innate intelligence may tell them that actually there's something that's far more important than that as well. Um, some people come for very physical healing, like they come with cancer, they come with something, and maybe that's their path to be healed of that, and maybe it's not. Maybe again there's something beyond that also they need to learn. Someone who's coming because they maybe they have been on a very deep spiritual path, and they have had reflections or ideas or experiences of this immersive state, this state of peace. The plants very well may take them to that experience, and show it to them on a much more fundamental level, something that again begins to actually shift the neurology of how we are, that begins to shift in our bones, in our however you want to look at it, and the fundamental core of who we are, and the DNA of us. And that can happen. Yes, but it's very difficult to speak in universal ways, because it's so personal. And again, as you've alluded to a few times, that's where, more and more it's been spoken about, this idea of integration, which again comes back. That's a integral means whole. Um, and so to fully integrate these experiences before chasing something else, um, and that's going to be very personal for who you are. But these paths, these plants, they can be a quick fix. That can happen. But in general, much like, I'm sure in your practice, like the real change, the lasting benefits come when it's a regular practice, something that's practiced with reverence, that's practiced for knowledge, for wisdom. And that also doesn't necessarily mean, every weekend I sit with this plant. That's, more isn't necessarily better. That's also not necessarily the case. But there's something very real to time, to quantity, but there's also something very real to quality, to who you are, to working on yourself, so that when you come to these, that you're able to help them to maximize their effect. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful exploration between you and yourself, observing the observer, and
Yes.
finally realizing that you never had to leave or go anywhere. Everything lies right here. And I mean, that's the part where, it's the epiphany. It's like all the systems, all the training. Martial form is, I teach people Tai Chi, Bagua, Kung Fu. I mean, none of that really has any basically actualized validation for any initiate until they start to understand the alchemical process. So it's kind of like, you want to go through and lift weights, but you want to be a power lifter until the fundamentals are put in place. You can't gain or garner the strength without putting foundation in. And there are opportunities where you can walk in and just be realized. But whenever it comes to anything that's a dance between myself and an opponent, the 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 first indication of where they're at on their state of awareness will be how much they admit their own emotional state, because that's the first thing that you zone in on when you are in a state of um, basically transmuting someone's extroverted effects of obtaining or controlling your state. And so if someone puts their hands on me, I become more soft and supple and enter their fascia with my own energy, which gives me dominion over them very quickly. And it's not with the, oh, let's just play with this. In many ancient practices, they call this the fa jin, the substance, the energy that you can basically change and alter the state. But you have to get to that point. That would lead me to believe that you are feeding this very limited perception and the need to identify your emotions and transmute them into a conflict, a resistance. And that's all part of truly adopting a martial form, is realizing you never actually have to apply it, because the mastery comes way before anyone is interacting with you physically. Yet, most of this is contemplation for many people that train in martial arts. I found that it is a gravitatory sort of state where people that are fueled by anger will always be driven to this control, and then they find that they can't be met with their true desire, which is corrupted, which is the need to control someone through some type of physical dominance. They're missing the point of truly embodying themselves or returning back to whole. And then there's some incredible teachers, such as you mentioned, your own teacher, and many people throughout history that have taught these processes, that it doesn't end in a hierarchy. You actually are self-realized, which is the true essence of any of these teachings, is to remember who you are. And some people run away with it, and it becomes a little corrupted, and there's a hierarchy and a need to separate, and you have to finally bow to the highest point within the material state, that is some avatar of mastery, as opposed to realizing that the student is the teacher is the student, and you are forever in that symbiosis, that dance. And by doing that, your gift is your offering. Furthermore, one of my teachers, the Jade Emperor, that I commune with on a daily basis, and also my teacher, Lao Tzu, that I've been channeling for about 36 years, they give me this insight. Something as simple as an incantation, which evokes the true essence of who you are, and you return. This incantation is something like this: a power abundant in its giving you will receive, unifying the body with the spirit with the energy, bringing heaven to earth, transcending all is one, one is all, revealing perfection manifest. That is your gift. That is your offering. That is your gift. That is your offering. That is your gift. That is your offering. And so the simplicity of Giving to receive is complete surrender, a sacrifice of something that is very limited and impermanent to receive something that is whole and eternal and forever immortal. And when you truly access that, your ascended state from a humanistic perspective would be accessing sentience and empathy. And truly, your default is you can't fight it. You can't fight servitude and selflessness. It's your very action and inaction, your very breath, your very thoughts, feelings, and emotions all return to that same state. That's when you realize, oh my goodness, I have arrived to an awareness of this. And then it falls back into itself. Because most people get consumed by the energy potential. And when you teach them something that, something like levitation, it becomes exciting. It becomes like a superpower, using energy to reform and recondition and return the flesh to perfection, as opposed to something that may be decayed, like some type of dis-ease that has been formed from your own perception. And then you realize you can regulate that energy potential and affect a return, a remembrance, a wholeness. And most people get consumed by that, and they go to mediumship, channeling, healing as identity. It's not a path of no return and a fault of their own, but to be truly whole, that is on your path of remembering who you are. Yet it is not ultimately your identity or your true self. And that's where, when you realize it's happening through you and not to you, things start to change.
Yeah, it reminded me, one of my teachers, he comes from a group of people in the Colombian Amazon called the Tubu, and they say that thousands of years, eons ago, humans were also suffering, and that these kind of the call of their suffering was heard from these spiritual beings, these kind of higher masters, I guess you could say. Interestingly, they say they descended from the star system Sirius, and they say they descended the 12 dimensions of time and space on this primordial anaconda canoe. And on that canoe, they brought with them these teachers, these masters, which were embodied in these different plants. And they said that a very similar idea, that the reason humans were suffering is because we've forgotten who we are and where we come from. And so all of these plants, the ultimate goal of them is to help us to remember that, because that is our original disease, or original disconnection from the nature of who we are. And so ultimately, these are all tools to help us to reconnect to that.
That's what I love about that experience. I mean, people are very descriptive about that unity. We refer to it as the three treasures: pituitary, thalamus, and pineal gland, activating that alchemical fun factory that we refer to as potential. And you can actualize it from a neuroplasticity perspective. Understanding the self receptors within the dermal layer is the antenna that absorbs your external environment and internalizes it. Using these three treasures, we use the culture medium, which is basically the blood, to shuttle, and with attention and intention, materialize things that would be impossible, activating a conscious state where you can turn on and off your gene expression and play with the 50 trillion cells that you possess as your physical flesh, and turn on the energy potential within that 0.07 millivolts of energy potential. This is where it gets exciting, because this is all part of it. We all have our own journey to remember. I've been obsessed with superheroes since a young boy, when I realized I could see through my hand and see through walls, see through bodies. And my mother never dampened that curiosity by telling me I was insane, just nurtured it by saying, hey, when you put your mind to it, anything is possible. And that grew into much deeper remembering at a very young age within my teenage years that, you know, there was just one event after another that would be equivalent to many lifetimes of actualizing in a very short period of time, which drew me to Taoism and being ordained and teaching people ancient rituals. This is all part of it. So, can you be actualized instantaneously? I would say yes, because it happened to me. So I never limit that by someone that that steps forward into that journey, and I'm an ambassador or an arbiter of their change instead of them harboring the same old mundane reality. I'm there as their cheering squad to help them remember through these ancient practices. And, psychonautic experiences that are very popular, even though you have been nurturing this wisdom teaching for many decades biologically, very much it's a popular thing right now. And what is the consensus that I kind of circumvented that myself as a young boy, as most of my friends were heavily involved in LSD and ecstasy and all these types of things. I never partake in any of that type of stuff, not because I look at it as something as a diminished return. It was never a spark of divine guidance for me. I just deterred for or denied that type of remembrance. But I can tell you quite frankly that when you activate this alchemical fun factory, you can produce your own DMT at will without external stressors, because it is a stress adaptation and then an expansive journey that we're all on. And when you understand how that catalyst will evoke that within you, you can materialize this stuff and activate nitric oxide, oxytocin, any chemical that is present within the human body from the lens of science can be activated consciously when you're mastered in that ability. And so, when there's certain forms of expression that start with the sacred objects that are formed when you go on these journeys, this is something that I can parallel and through my own admission, through my own mastery, can share it with others. And I think that what's most important, if you merge with this ancient ritual of all the medicine, which I referred to as just plant like ancestry, and many people, as you said, they refer to it as some type of need to remedy something that is broken within them, instead of identifying this honored sort of state of ancient practices, that it's about just that remembrance. It's not about having to fix something that's broken. Then the relationship, the union is the now moment. And it gets so deep that whenever I witness what they would consider supernatural experiences, whether it's a change in the human flesh, whether it's a distortion, bones fuse, tumors disappear, gashes seal before my eyes. This happens very similarly to things that I more commonly associate, where if you can access things like bending metal, if you've ever bent metal before, and being able to tap into that frequency, that resonance, flesh is no different. And so you focus your attention and intention, and you enter into that state, that primordial state of Wu Ji, and then all of a sudden you have complete dominion, imperium, maestro over that tapestry, and then things just they alter at your will, because your will is the Tao, your will is the mother, and it returns everything to wholeness. So that emanation, whatever the counter effects are of surrounding environment, place, person, or thing, will also return. It's not a diminished return of whether, many people consider magic as being something where if you get on that path, you must heal 3 other people with your magic intention. It happens as a default within Taoist alchemy that everything returns to whole. Now, people that are in a certain place of development may be contending with a higher level of awareness of their thoughts, feelings, and emotions because they're trapped within the material and have yet to experience their wholeness. So it may look like shit gets real on a mental, emotional state, yet it's a healing because you get to identify it as something that's external. It's not who you are. And that's where you can emanate it and return it, which liberates your energy.
Yeah. All of these practices, there's a tremendous wisdom there, and Taoism has very, very beautiful roots, very, very powerful roots, and it's beautiful you're doing that. It's a time of I think of healing, of knowledge, of wisdom, of people bringing these different paths together, creating something new. It's a very indigenous prophecy. So that's great. As I said, Taoism had a huge impact on my life. There's a beautiful, beautiful wisdom there, beautiful traditions, and ultimately these paths are pointing towards oneness and what resonates with people, what works, what gets them there. It's beautiful.
Well, you mentioned the Tao Te Ching, which is what we refer to as the magical register, which is an intimate relationship with the mother. So when you evoke that by audible or inaudible, activation, the mother returns you to whole. That's why many people refer to that as a living scripture, because no matter how many times you read it or you embody it, it has a different experience, a different resonance to whatever is met for the very moment that you're experiencing it. And within I just recently transcribed the Tao Te Ching with my teacher Lao Tzu last year, and his 2024 version is a magical mystery ride that is met with 81 levels of consciousness per incantation, plus a frequency, a shape, and a color. And you go on that psychonautic ride of remembrance just through your relationship. So it's a reflection of wholeness. So anything that may be considered diminished from the initiate will be returned to whole. And it's such a visceral, kinesthetic, somatic response that you're like, it's undeniable. This is living. This is wholeness that I'm experiencing. And that magical register goes deeper into that relationship with the alchemist and how we apply Taoist magic within this material state to create alterations that help everything return to whole. And that's more fundamental within sort of a karmic model of how you return all those distorted energy, as my dear friends, the Buddhist monks would call the dukkha, to a wholeness. And that's the exciting part of alchemy, in my opinion, is all these incredible things that you're teaching, that I'm teaching, that just it's so exciting to witness someone else's awareness of their true self.
Mm, absolutely. And yeah, as I mentioned, it's the guy who I was speaking to you about. His name is Amika from the Tubu. They say that this is the time of the Diro Amasa, and they translate that as the children of the new dawn. And they say it's the time of the people who have different skin colors and hair colors and eye colors, which was quite interesting for them because they seemingly never knew anything outside of their little corner of the jungle, and yet they prophesize that this is the time that we're in, and it's the people who can literally do just that, alchemize these different traditions, and they would say to bring together the medicine of the four directions to create a new maloka. And for them, the maloka is the living house, the ceremonial house, but it also represents the universe, and it also represents this infinite, eternal wu wei, time and space, this dance between these polarities. And that's what they say the time we're in is. And it's beautiful that there's people out there fulfilling that prophecy.
Yeah. I mean, as we would say directly from my teacher, Lao Tzu, let the man who has never left the village, let him know he has seen the world.
Mm.
Because it's right here. The truth teller will always be the absolute. And that will be discovered by the invitation of the initiate, and that remembrance, that path is forever, and it's for the individual that realizes the collective is really the truth, oneness, as some physicists might call the singular, the 0 point, however you want to perceive it. You will realize that you are all things and nothing just from curiosity, and a little inquiry will evoke that. And then of course your belief system will be your knowing through your experience, which is where your wisdom teaching is so powerful, because we must experience our truth, and your truth is the only truth you need to be concerned with. And when that comes to a fact-based true experience, it's all just this, everything is gravy, everything is perfection. And from one of your teachers you mentioned that, and that's within Taoism we refer to everything as perfection manifest. The perfection of the diamond is everything is a facet of that one diamond. You say tomato, I say tomato, we all return to that perfection. And that monologue is accessed through the dialogue of your own experiences. And for me, I love to embrace my intimate relationship with my teachers that come in that spirit form. And I see them as I see you. I hear them as I hear you. And I'm not 3 cents short of $1 or anywhere close to a psychotic episode. It's a mastery that comes with your relationship, and you form it however you choose to. There's a million ways up the mountain. The second you dismiss someone else's belief system, you dismiss your own, which I think is so exciting about where we are on the human timeline, is that all these wisdom teachings are emerging and people are starting to go, oh my goodness, my favorite football team is God, yours is Tao, yet they have similarity in that resonance. And it's so beautiful. I open my heart and I cry with happiness, tears of joy, because there's this union instead of a separator from an indoctrinated religious dogma. And again, I will say this, metaphysics, still, I find the origins of my Taoist teachings as a priest. So the religion is an aspect that people are not very familiar with within Taoism, but it does, everything is really part of the same seamless fabric. So when we have 1,000 gods, they're all part of that dialogue to the monologue. All those gods return to the same source. And that's where people get, they're like, oh, because when you first share that with someone, the first response that I remember years ago with one of my dear friends who was of Jewish faith, he was like, oh, wow, where have you been? Oh, I was just ordained as a priest. And his natural response was, there's only one God. I'm like, easy, brother, easy. We can all get along here. It all comes together, yet people don't realize how indoctrinated, how programmed they are to be so narrow in their perception. And it's the teaching and the exposure that you share with the world that makes it possible for people to remember and realize that there is no separation, that you are me, I am you. And that's the part that I really love is moments like this.
Well, that's beautifully put, my friend. I think I think I couldn't have said it any better.
And I imagine I can hear the music in the background. And as Boys to Men would say, we have come to the end of the road for now. I think this conversation has been fantastic. I'm very grateful that you've taken the time and come to share this with my audience. And you're an incredible gift, my friend. And furthermore, before we end this podcast, I'm going to put your social sphere and interweb under this. so people know where to find you, I'll ask you one last question. What is your definition of spiritual consciousness?
My definition of spiritual consciousness. Yeah, I think if the audience rewinds this about 2 minutes, I think you gave them a beautiful definition of spiritual consciousness, and very much this idea that we are all one, and that this dance of this world made manifest is this dance, again, as you beautifully put it, between the inhale, the exhale, between the doing, the not doing, between the masculine, the feminine, and that who we truly are is that space in between. And that's what we're all searching for. That's what we're all looking for. And whether it's today, tomorrow, in another life, that's where we come from, and that's where we return to. And if we're lucky enough to experience, that's where we are.
So beautifully said. In closing, would you like to share with the audience where people can find you, more of your wisdom teaching?
Sure. Yeah, I have a website. It's called nicotianorustica.org. That's my personal work. And then the podcast that I have, it's called The Universe Within. And you can find it on all the major platforms: YouTube, Spotify, Apple. And I guess the other one that I use is Instagram. So it's just my name, Jason, at Jason Grachanik. And that has kind of maybe a combination of everything. So
beautiful, my friend. I'm very grateful for you. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
thank you.
This in the future at some point.
It'd be my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on, and thank you for the work you're doing and bringing your voice into the world, bringing other voices into the world. As I said, I think that is the time we're in, of really sharing and moving towards that universal truth, and helping to heal the world one person at a time. So I have a huge respect and reverence for these Taoist teachers. Lao Tzu was the first, and he still holds a very, very special place in my heart. So anyone who speaks the words of him, I have a tremendous respect for.
I'm very grateful, my friend. So I want to thank you. I want to thank the universe for bringing you into my life. I want to thank the audience for sharing their time with us today. And I'm your humble servant and Sifu Taoist Master San Qing. And I'll see you in the next one, guys.